Okay, good morning, guys. Today we're going to be discussing Romanticism. So Romanticism comes after Neoclassicism. I mean, usually with art, it's not like that clear line, but we can sort of say that Romanticism happened after Neoclassicism. What's interesting to note about Romanticism coming after Neoclassicism, and you will notice it as you go through art history, is it tends to have this weird sort of pendulum effect. So, for example, when we look at Neoclassicism, that was very rigid, very strict. They had very sort of logical ways of creating their artworks. There were a lot of straight lines, a lot of architecture, a lot of throwbacks to Greek and Roman art. It's very logical. It's, like we said, used for propaganda. So there is a lot of elements of war and sort of a conceptual nature, but we can also say that it's very humanist in a sense. What I mean by that is it's very concerned with human issues and human concerns. So like politics, war, that's the sort of stuff that Neoclassicism typically was about. Romanticism, on the other hand, makes more of a turn towards nature. So to some degree, if you continue on the timeline, you will see that war and all those things, oppression of people by royalty, was very violent. People started suffering. So the sort of idealism that happened with Neoclassicism, people started to reject. They didn't want this sort of humanistic worldview. So they turned more towards nature, they turned more towards myth, which is also part of Neoclassicism if you look at their return to Greek mythology and stuff like that. But Romanticism sort of sees the danger of those idealistic storytelling methods. Also within the time of Romanticism, there is also even more war, and people are starting to get very sort of jaded and angry. So the artists in Romanticism turn to nature to sort of see it as a way to escape these struggles that they had within the neoclassical period. So they break away from laws and rules. So they're saying that if we look at neoclassical work, they were very strict. They were dividing their canvases into thirds. They had very specific ways of filling up their canvas spaces, and Romanticists try to break away from this. They try to break away from these traditions because these traditions have typically failed them. If you just look at the wars that are happening in this time, they're starting to realize that these humanistic ideals just aren't working for them. So they break away from the laws and rules. They focus on nature. They believe this is where man can be truly free. So they realize with Neoclassicism that these societies we've built only benefits a select few people in the society. So they are trying to break away from these structures and they turn to nature. Nature is beautiful in its own way. It doesn't necessarily require any rules or regulations. It's nature and it's beautiful and sublime. So the Romanticists start to turn to nature as inspiration. They're inspired by natural occurrences, the inexplicable, the sublime, death. So these are all natural occurrences that happen. So when we talk about the sublime, the best way I can sort of explain the sublime is if you've ever seen a really beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset. Maybe you were in a very beautiful place where you just felt like, wow, this is beautiful. You feel kind of overwhelmed. You feel like you want to laugh and cry and that you're in love with the sunset. That feeling is the feeling of sublime. Then they also, on the other side of that, have death, which is a thing that comes for all of us. So it's a very natural thing. But it also, they were interested in death and not necessarily the afterlife, just these natural occurrences. So while you have the sublime, this beautiful nature on the one side, you also have this dark death side. If we look at this painting, this doesn't necessarily fully depict all of the themes of Romanticism, but what is interesting about this painting is it starts to show a very clear difference between neoclassical art and this. I mean, this is a very, very strange painting. They're all sort of hanging around this goat. This one woman in the corner seems like she's offering her skeleton baby to this weird goat thing. So yeah, there is a lot of occultism coming in. There is a lot of myth and story and nature. So yeah, I just wanted to show you this painting to really make you see the contrast already from neoclassicism and Romanticism. So here's just some more paintings about about Romanticism. Romanticism is a strong subjective style and focuses on personal freedom. So what we mean when we say subjective is it relates to the subject, and we are the subject. So it would be things that interest the artist. So if you look at neoclassicism, they made art about society and things that concern society, politics, those sort of things, where Romanticism is more focusing on a personal, subjective story. Next, we have artists are individuals. They are emotional, impulsive, and often lose sight of reality. You can clearly see in these paintings that reality does not matter much to these romanticists. I mean, we have this weird goat person, and here we have a bunch of witches and crows. You can clearly see the difference in these works compared to neoclassical works. These are far more emotive, far more almost depressing, dark. It's not as clean. Like if you look, these brushstrokes are like very rough. It's about emotion. It's about feelings. It isn't this logical, straight-lined, perfectly painted things. It depicts tragic, dramatic, and exciting scenes like war, politics, everyday life, works from Shakespeare, and themes from Greek mythology. So the difference, I think, with Romanticism and Neoclassicism, even though it is still similar themes. I mean, they have a greater focus on nature and emotion, but we still see war, we still see politics, we still see Greek mythology, which was also present in neoclassical work. But the neoclassical works are sort of optimistic, where Romanticist works, especially when it comes to war and politics, I feel like if you look at Romanticist works where they paint nature, those can be seen as sort of optimistic in a sense, because nature gives them an escape to this drudgery of everyday life. But when they do paint war and politics, if we think about the Oath of the Orati, for example, that neoclassical work that we discussed by Jacques-Louis David, that work is depicting war, it is depicting sort of politics and all those things, but it's in a very positive sense. The lines are clean. It's sort of men just going to war because it's their duty. When we look at Romanticist works that deal about war and politics, or deal with war and politics and myth, it is more raw, it is more gritty, it is violent. They're actually not portraying war as this positive thing. War is depicted as something terrible and something that ruins, like, countries. So their depiction of the same themes is much different than from the neoclassical painters. Romanticism, unlike neoclassicism, uses very rich colors. They use dynamic brushstrokes, as we saw here in these clouds. It's not that perfect, like almost marble-esque way of painting. It's rich brushstrokes, dynamic movement. It's focused on individual creativity. They use inspiration from literature. Portraits depict emotional and psychological states. It's not just these perfect portraits. A lot of exotic scenes, because also what happened when Romanticism started developing was there was a bigger sense of travel. Like colonization was really taking full swing. People were discovering new countries, new lands, stuff like that. So there is a depiction of the exotic scene. So if you look at this Death of Sardanapalus, this artwork depicts the Middle East, and it wasn't painted in the Middle East. So there was a lot more travel happening, and they started getting inspired by more exotic scenes. There's always a lot of drama in these artworks. It's if compared to neoclassical works, Romanticism is, I don't know, a Cirque du Soleil show, and I don't know, neoclassicism is a school play. I don't know how you would say that, but it's far more dramatic. You see there's overlapping bodies, there is death, there is sensuality, there is, just a lot of drama. So I'm quickly going to go through the differences between neoclassicism and Romanticism. We have discussed it a bit so far, but this is just a light list for you guys. So neoclassicism is logical, it's intellectual, it's objective, as objective as it can be. It has clear shapes, it is simple, it is neat and precise. Romanticism, on the other hand, is very emotional, it distorts objects, it's subjective. So something being objective means there is no bias. It is just logic. So a lot of times people would argue that something like math is objective, where something like art, for example, is subjective. So we don't care about the objective facts, we care about the subjective facts, the facts that I feel is important, the subject. It is complicated, it is expressive in its style. So the first artist we're going to be looking at when it comes to Romanticism is Francisco Goya. Now, Francisco Goya was a very interesting painter. He's a Spanish painter, but he's always been kind of revolutionary. So he was the personal painter of King Charles IV of Spain. He also was the director of the Royal Spanish Academy. So he paints royalty for money, but I don't think if you look at his paintings that he necessarily cared much for the royals. It was just his sort of way of making a living. If you look at this painting, you can also see this is the royal family, but this is not how, if you compare it to paintings of Napoleon or those French neoclassical paintings of royalty, those are very beautiful. They paint the royals as heroic, as strong, as leaders. Here, the royal family does not look good. They kind of look like there's some radioactivity in the water. They do not look good. I mean, this one woman over here, if you look here, this woman's not even looking at the painter. She's like looking behind her. Who knows who that was? Maybe that was someone's cousin that they were like, don't put her in the painting. She's completely looking away. This old lady here looks like she's seen a ghost. We have this actual ghost here in the background. It's not an actual ghost, but that man looks like a ghost. He's so pushed into the background. So it's not a very flattering depiction of royalty. And I think that is sort of what Goya was doing. He was painting for the royals, but he kind of took it as an opportunity to take stabs at them. Goya's career stretches over 60 years. It's a very long career, especially if you consider when he was alive, like in the 19th century. He wasn't alive at the 19th century. I think he was. Never mind. It was very long ago. So medicine was not very readily available. People didn't live very long. So for someone to have a career that stretches 60 years in this time is insane. And what is great about his career being this long is we see a lot of transformations happening in his painting style as he grows older, as he becomes more depressed, as he becomes more aware of the issues of life. He constantly redesigns himself, which is what we just said. For example, if you look at this painting, Sleep of Reason produces monsters. It's not a painting. I think it's probably an etching. I'm not completely sure, but it's not a painting. I think it's an etching. And this, compared to this, I mean, you still see that sort of gritty style, but this is a beautiful in quotation marks. It's far more pretty compared to something like this, which is fantastical. There are these weird bat-like creatures attacking this man or woman that's sleeping. It's a far more fantastical artwork. Here we see another painting of a royal family member. He was an independent Spanish painter. During his life, he worked in several styles, often depicting human cruelty in his themes. His work was never sentimental and focused on the honest, cruel truth. Now, that is a very important statement, because like we said with the royals, he wasn't painting them to be heroic or beautiful or strong. This is another commissioned painting of a woman. Now, typically when we see these sort of commissioned paintings of rich ladies, they would want you to really paint them beautifully. And even though this artwork is painted quite beautifully from a technical point of view, what is being depicted is really not very pretty. This woman, her legs look too short. She has very tiny little shoes that she's trying to make you aware of if you look at where she's pointing. The background looks like some post-apocalyptic wasteland, and this lady is just standing there in her fancy dress, looking very, I don't know, she doesn't look very happy. So yeah, these aren't, like we said, very beautiful depictions of these rich royal people. He tries to paint them for what they really are, which is just people at the end of the day. As he grew up, as he grew older, he became deaf. And he started to suffer from depression. And this is when he started going into his black paintings. Now, that doesn't mean that all his paintings are black. They're just very dark. And they have depressing themes. So if we look at this artwork, it is also depicting a mythical tale. It is Kronos eating his children. And Kronos is the Greek god of time. Here he is consuming his children. So this is a very, very violent, very disturbing image at the end of the day. And you can see the progression if we go from just over here. Here he's still trying to actually shade very nicely. He's trying to depict form using light and color, and it's a little softer than, for example, this painting over here, which, I mean, you can see the brushstrokes. That face is not realistic. It is a gross, unsettling image. That's eventually where his art ended up. Characteristics of Goya's work is he places his figures in crisscross patterns and diagonals. Now, what we've discussed already when we talk about art analysis is when we use a lot of diagonals, it creates a lot of movement, because our eye follows these diagonals, like we follow her body. Here, again, we see this going down this way, going this way, there's a diagonal here, there's a diagonal here, and then all these diagonals get completely disrupted by this body, which becomes the focal point. He places his characters in a lot of crisscross patterns, he uses a lot of diagonal lines. Figures are sometimes distorted and not proportional, as we, again, can see here. It depicts emotion and not realism. You could actually even argue that his work is more realistic, not necessarily in its form, but in its content. He is depicting real humans looking the way they really do. It's more realistic in that sense. His themes are portraits, Greek mythology, and political events. So we're going to discuss this artwork by Francisco Goya, The Execution at the 3rd of May. So I'm just going to open my Photoshop so we can discuss it with my pen tool. But let me just tell you a quick sort of rundown of what was happening. This artwork wasn't painted on 1808. This event happened on the 3rd of May on 1808. And it sort of depicts the atrocities of war. So Napoleon's army invaded Spain, and the Spanish people resisted. What is depicted in this artwork is these group of Spanish civilians being brutally executed by the French forces. So, what was very gross about this event is these were civilians. They weren't soldiers. They were literally just people in the town, and they were brutally murdered. They weren't even necessarily resisting. They were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they were brutally murdered. So if we, for example, look at this artwork in comparison to the Oath of the Hierati, both about war, both sort of propaganda, but this artwork is actually depicting, like, violence. like actual real life violence. Where the Oath of Arati is very clinical, it's very clean, it's sort of pre-war, it can still romanticize war a little bit. Where here we can see like this person's been shot, there's blood everywhere. This person is holding up his hands, he's like, please don't shoot me. People are crying, people are literally piled on top of each other, dead. So yeah, we already see that this depiction of war is far more atrocious, it's far more violent. It's not this idealized sense of duty that comes with war. So yeah, there's a few interesting things in this artwork that happens, but we will discuss them as we go through it. We're going to do a full sort of artwork analysis, and through doing that we will bring to light all the different things that is happening in this painting. So, as we typically do with artwork analysis, we're going to start by naming what we see. We see a sort of landscape with a city in the background. There is a group of people on the left, and these people are kind of scattered. Their body figures are very diagonal. They're lying on top of each other. They're stacked. On the right side, we have more men, another group of people, but there is a clear difference between this group of people and this group of people, in the sense that, like I said, these bodies are all scattered, they're all diagonal and jagged. Here, these men are in perfect formation. You see, this body is repeated here, is repeated here, is repeated here, is repeated here. So once again, we kind of see the contrast between the general population, people who are free, well, free in quotation marks, but they are dynamic, they are not this logical structure, where these men can be considered more akin to the same way neoclassical people would have painted. They're in line, they are rigid, they are following orders, they are sort of not human in their perfection, or in their formation. So yeah, we'll start off with line in this artwork. So there's a lot of lines again happening, and we can see Goya's use of diagonals. We have a diagonal here, there's this diagonal here, here, there's diagonals here. All of these diagonals are then contrasted by this horizontal line where the city is in the background. There's a diagonal going over here, leading your eye in. So yeah, we can say there's a lot of diagonals in this artwork that is making it far more dynamic. There is movement happening because of all these diagonals. But again, we can also speak about line in the sense that here lines are crisscrossing, they're not straight. Here they are creating this sort of repetition effect. These men are just clones of each other, where these people are actual human beings that have flaws and are dynamic and are changing. Yeah, so we see line here causing repetition. We see a lot of diagonal lines happening in this artwork. This diagonal here leads your eye in, which then follows up here and goes to this man here, which is sort of the focal point, but we'll get to that now. Next, we're going to go to color. Now, I know we said that Romanticist work typically uses a lot of vibrant colors, and we will definitely see that when we discuss more landscape artworks or artworks depicting nature. In this artwork, we are mainly seeing war and atrocities of war. So painting it in vibrant colors would actually hurt his message. So we can see that the color usage in this artwork is very muted. It's a lot of browns, a lot of grays, it's a lot of blacks. So yeah, the colors are very muted, it's a very somber scene. But what is also happening with color is this area becomes the brightest because of this light source right here. So this man or this area here becomes the focal point because the use of color here, the use of more bright colors than what we're seeing here, creates contrast between here and here, and even between the background and here. So this man becomes the focal point. What's interesting about this man is if you look at the way he's standing, that kind of looks reminiscent of Jesus on the cross. So they sort of depict this man as a martyr, but also the fact that he's standing with his hands up and going, I surrender, in some sense, he's still being shot, you know? So it again shows sort of the violence and the atrocity of these royal people that come into villages and occupy their villages and ending up killing civilians who have like nothing to do with this. They were just living there. So yeah, we can see this image as a sort of Jesus figure. I think especially because he is the lightest, we also get this sense that he's almost radiating holy light in a sense. So that's what comes, or that's what the color is about in this artwork. Next, we are gonna go to our shapes. Now, in this artwork, there isn't a lot of negative, there isn't a lot of shapes really happening in this artwork because there isn't a lot of flat color used. And that is because of the way Romanticists painted. They had very dynamic brushstrokes. It's not that flattening out that sort of happens with neoclassical work. So we're not going to discuss shape that much in this artwork. What we can say, maybe regarding shape, is that this shirt of this man, or actually his whole body, doesn't actually have a lot of shadows on it, which sort of accentuates that Christ-like shape that is happening there. Next, we're going to go to form. And form, we know, happens when we have blending and tonal values to make things look 3D. Now, definitely in this artwork, we do see a handling of form. We can tell that this is fabric. We can tell that the leg is round or like bending. So form is used here to generate a sort of 3D shape. But yeah, because there is such a high contrast because of this light, form is not as smoothly depicted. Like with neoclassical works, the artworks are painted very smoothly. It looks hyper-realistic. The form is hyper-realistic in 3D. But here we see a strong contrast happening because of this light source, and it is sort of washing out the forms. What that adds to the work is it adds drama, it adds emphasis. The high contrast is making the scene far more emotional than it typically would be. Next, we're going to go to texture. And again, we see very dynamic brushstrokes happening, which creates texture, but also the repetition of bodies creates texture in a sense. So yeah, that's how texture is shaped in this artwork. Beyond the actual visual texture that happens because of repetition of bodies, we also see that the artist, even though he was painting quite dynamically, was handling texture realistically. I can tell that the material of this boot is not the same as the material used for this jacket that this man is wearing. So yeah, that's how texture is used in this artwork. So that's basically this artwork and how it depicts these atrocities of war. I will have a discussion like this in class with you guys as well, because it is kind of hard for me to fully give you a sense of this artwork without discussing it. I'm trying to just sort of run down the facts right now, but we will in class, when we really get into Romanticism, do a class discussion about this work, because this work is extremely interesting. It has such a powerful composition. Its composition has led to the inspiration of a lot of other works in the future. So yeah, it's a very iconic painting. I think the most important thing to take away from this artwork is how the Romanticism tried to really not ironically romanticize war and things like that. There is a clear divide in between this artwork where we have the people and we have the oppressive powers. So yeah, that's just our introduction to Romanticism. We're going to have a few more lessons on Romanticism. And like I said, we'll have full artwork discussions then. But for now, this is just our introduction. So let's just quickly run through this again. Sorry, I don't know why these ads are coming up. That So annoying. So yeah, we're just going to quickly run through the characteristics again of Romanticism, just to make sure you guys are with it. It is a reaction to neoclassicism and that strict sort of logical way of painting. It breaks away from the laws and the rules. It focuses on nature, and it believes this is where man can truly be free. This can be especially seen in that Goya work, where it isn't nature that is oppressing people. It is people that are oppressing people. So yeah, nature is sort of our way to escape. It is inspired by natural occurrences, the inexplicable, the sublime, and death. So again, we see that the sublime and death can be considered sort of in the same vein, because they're both natural occurrences that is sort of full of emotion. Romanticism is a strong subjective style, and it focuses on personal freedom. Again, we can see in that 3rd of May artwork, it is about personal freedom, not just for the artist, but what is depicted is sort of trying to say, why are we allowing ourselves to be so controlled by these royal people or by these laws and structures that doesn't actually benefit people? Yeah, it depicts the tragic, dramatic, and exciting. So yeah, if we again look at that 3rd of May painting, it is tragic and dramatic, but it is also very exciting. It isn't just a beautiful pastoral landscape. It is war at its worst. Uses rich colors, not in the one that we discussed with Goya, although there is an element of bright colors with the focal point of the man. But yeah, in that artwork there isn't a lot of rich colors, but in this Death of Sardanapalus by Delacroix, you can see a lot of vibrant colors and dynamic brushstrokes. It focuses on individual creativity, inspiration from literature, and life events. Portraits depict emotional and psychological states. So again, compare the Oath of the Urarti to the Massacre of the 3rd of May. The one is very clinical, that even if there are like people crying in the corner, it's still very clinical, where the 3rd of May artwork is very emotional. It's exotic scenes and dramatic. And just a quick rundown again of the differences. Neoclassicism is intellectual, objective, clear shapes, simple, neat, and precise. Romanticism is emotional, distorted objects, subjective, and complicated, and uses expressive style. So yeah, that's our first introduction to Romanticism. As we go through the other artworks, the stylistic elements of Romanticism will become more clear, because then we have examples of how these things were depicted. But yeah, this is just an introduction. We will have a few more classes, and we will have a physical contact session where I discuss these things with you, because I feel like it's better if we can have a class discussion where everyone can engage and really understand what these works are about. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you do start getting a sense. You don't have to understand the whole of Romanticism right now. This is just an introduction. We are just starting to scratch at the surface of Romanticism, but as we go, you will see more of how Romanticism manifests itself. It isn't just Goya's very dark and depressing works, which is important to understand as well, but that's not all Romanticism was about. There is a severe element of appreciation of nature, but we will see that as we go on. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, but like I said, we will have a physical contact session soon, and then we will discuss these things as well. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.